And welcome back, Dino Bidalo Show. We're live right here, Wednesday, November 18th. People on hold, stay on hold. We're going to get to you. I promise we have a lot of time for calls. But right now we have a great guest that you're not going to want to miss because it fits perfectly in what we've been talking about. I'm very happy to welcome back to the show Ruth Ben-Ghiat, professor of history at NYU, an expert on fascist regime of Benito Mussolini, writes frequently for CNN, and she's got a brand new, timely, alarming book out, Strongmen, From Mussolini to the Present. Ruth, welcome back.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Ruth, it's scary times. Before you came on, I was scaring the audience. But I told them I would rather be wrong and scare people than, and people go like, Dean, you were over the top and you scared us, and it not be the case, than allow Trump to go where I think he's going. And that's the truth. So I want to talk to you about your book a little bit and about Trump and intertwine the two. But first, I got to get there was a line in your book that jumped out at me. And you wrote, for the strong man, politics is always personal. I found that really intriguing because it made me think of Trump so much because everything is personal. Why is it for the strong man that politics is always personal?
So all of the people I feature in the book, although some are, fascists, some are they get their military coups, some are there today, they all use what's called personalist rule, which is one person has overwhelming power and comes to kind of domesticate his party and to a certain extent the institutions, and they don't see any difference between their own power and state power. So they don't think that they represent the people, they think they embody the people. And they tend to be very corrupt, and they use state resources for their own personal ends. And their parties end up working overtime for their private, if they get into private, judicial problems, legal problems, their parties end up working for them, which is totally what's happened with Donald Trump.
Everything for this guy is personal. So there was another event you wrote about in your book that reminds me of what we're going through now. In 1936 in Spain, the center-right party refused to accept the results of the election. That was going to bring the left-wing parties into power. And then here steps in General Franco. And then a civil war followed, and then he was leader of Spain till the 70s. When you hear Trump now declaring himself the winner of this election, does it match up with any of the other authoritarians you've written about or strongmen?
I mean, our age today, they come into power through elections, and then they have to manipulate elections to stay there. And there's many occasions, I mean, you cited, Spain from the 30s, where they chose to solve the problem by having a military coup. And that happened many times. Now that the kind of military coup era is over, and so we're talking a lot in America now about, is a coup happening? So it was very interesting that General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was used as a prop by Trump at Lafayette Square this summer, if you'll recall, he went out of his way to say, well, guess what? The armed forces is respecting the Constitution. It's not obeying an individual. And that was a very pointed message to Trump. So I don't know if he's going to have much success with, an old-fashioned armed forces coup, but there's all these very ruthless people he has behind him. They're very invested in staying in power, and they're going to try other means, like legal means, invalidating results, recounts that they're fabricating, things like this. And this is what people do today.
It's, we were talking about some of the legal approach of Donald Trump, and as a lawyer, and as other lawyers who are experts in election law have pointed out consistently, that Donald Trump is losing the legal battle. It's a political battle. That's what he's trying to win here. And, but it doesn't, but they're not hiding what they want. In the filing that just happened about an hour ago in Pennsylvania, the Trump lawyers wrote, plaintiffs, which is Trump, will seek the remedy of Trump being declared the winner of the legal votes in Pennsylvania in the 2020 election, and thus the recipient of Pennsylvania's electors. That's what's in the Rudy Giuliani new amended complaint that they just filed in court, or they're actually asking court for leave to file that, to get essentially permission to file that. They're not pretending, they're not hiding that they want to overturn the will of the people. What they're doing, in my view, is a cover story of fraud without any basis of fraud. There's no showing of fraud whatsoever. It just doesn't exist. That's a cover. That's a cover for a political game, in my view, for the Republican state members of the legislatures to hopefully, in their view, overturn the election by either appointing a Trump slate or not certifying the election so it doesn't get the 270 electoral votes and the House picks Donald Trump. I know it's not a coup in the sense of tanks in the street, but it really feels like that to me. And maybe there's another term that should be used. What do you think?
No, I mean, it fits the category of what's called an auto coup or a self coup when somebody is there and doesn't want to leave. And again, today they use legal means or financial means, all kinds of other means that are not necessarily armed forces. But the other thing, and this was true about coups too, they're waging psychological warfare. And they're trying to act as though the election, if it happened, but it was fraudulent, and we're going to go ahead and do what we want to anyway. And even in the age of military coups, there's times when a very small number of men was able to capture the apparatus of power. And so those who study coups talk about creating the appearance of control, right? So this is what they're doing. They're trying to they're both chipping away at people by attacking, state election officials who are not going to do their bidding, but they're trying to create this sense, they're trying to exhaust everybody and also create this sense that this is going to happen no matter what. And we've been having psychological warfare waged by him at us for 4 years. And so everything he's doing has been set up before and in terms of rigged election discourse, and is a result of his whole method of rule.
When you saw Donald Trump declare himself the winner, and he keeps doing this over and over, how alarming is that to you as an expert on authoritarianism?
It's horrifying. And honestly, one of the things I'm most worried about is his partners in crime, the GOP. And this is, in my book, I show over and over around the world, they've all needed these kind of elites, political elites who bring these extremists into the system and use them. It's a mutual using. And then once they make their bargains with them, they stick with them till the bitter end. Like almost no matter what happens, what destruction they cause to their nation, what fraud, what crimes, they stick with them. And so here we have the GOP. And, we're in a situation, it's just bonkers, where illiberal leaders like Modi in India and Erdogan in Turkey have called Biden to congratulate him on winning the election. But the GOP won't accept the election having been won. They won't accept that they lost. This is a highly dangerous situation. So I'm with you that it's very important to be watchful, and nothing is really off the table when this party, it is only a handful of them have actually accepted reality.
When you look objectively at the GOP now, where do you put them in terms of embracing democratic principles in our country? I can't give it I don't want to say like 1 to 10, but in your view, have they backslid as a party? Are they more, if you were going to put like a graph and democratic principles on top and truly fascist authoritarian on the bottom there, are they getting closer and closer to being more of a party that embraces authoritarianism and rejects the democratic principles? Yeah,
they're as witnessed by what they're doing right now. No party that embraces democracy does what they're doing right now. This is, and one of the reasons Trump is so busy with his, reshufflings and his purges and putting the people in. This is very alarming too, because he's upping the loyalty quotient because this is the ultimate high stakes game to steal the election, right? And one of the things that was very interesting to me, because I'm not a specialist in American history, so I took this view that I formed by studying global authoritarianism and I turned it on America. So what you see is that there are all these studies that the GOP was already moving in a kind of authoritarian direction when Trump came on the scene. And they had kind of given up bipartisan governments and also the idea of mutual tolerance, where you may not agree with your opponent, but you don't start talking about locking her up, right? So they'd already kind of gone off the rails. And one of the hard truths we have to face, Trump might leave, but the GOP is remaining, and we have to be very frank and sober and look with clear eyes about what they are today.
I'm chatting with Ruth Ben-Ghiat, professor of history at NYU and author of the great new book, just came out, Strongmen, From Mussolini to the Present. And obviously the present deals with Donald Trump, but other leaders like Berlusconi and Putin and alike. When you look at this election, Joe Biden wins with 79 million votes, the most votes ever. He might even get to 80 million or more when this is over. But Donald Trump, after 4 years of what we saw, an assault on our democratic principles, serial lying, coddling of white supremacists, spewing bigotry, corruption, he got 73.5 million votes, which would have been a record if Joe Biden didn't beat him in this race. What does that say to you?
So never underestimate Donald Trump, because one of the things he did superbly is create a personality cult. And I talk in the book about personality cults, and the first person to have one was Mussolini, and then with the communists also. But he has been able to, despite the criminal mismanagement of the pandemic and all the other things, and of course, not only in spite of, but because of his, machismo and his lying, his rule breaking, which thrills a lot of people. So he's been able to create this personality cult, and the rules of the cult are once they bond to the ruler, they will believe anything he says, and it's very hard to break those bonds. And this is what a lot of people are seeing now. They're frustrated. They have family members who love Trump and don't really believe that COVID is a danger, despite the very clear evidence. So he's going to take those, I don't know what he'll do when he leaves, but he'll take those 70 million souls with him, and this is another thing we're going to have to reckon with.
It's really interesting you said that, because I began the show also partly because I knew you were going to be on, of course, but Donald Trump from the authoritarian playbook, even on COVID, lying. And I want to play a clip for you. This is Donald Trump, an infamous statement about what you're seeing and hearing is not what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Here's clip number 3, please, Matt.
It's all working out. And just remember, what you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening.
He said that, and then he went on from there to say, and I'm all about making America great again. When you hear that, I mean, does it conjure up to you Mussolini, Berlusconi, Hitler, Franco? Like, what does that conjure up to you?
So I added a chapter on, it's called A Greater Nation. It's about the myth of national greatness. And it's always about, it's not just making the nation great, so it's utopia. Everything's bad now, and I'm going to make everything great in the future. So they hold out this dream, like they make, and this is where their personality cult, they make people dream, right? They're the ultimate man. But it's always also make the nation great again. So Mussolini harked back to the Roman Empire. Erdogan today in Turkey talks about the Ottoman Empire. And Trump, it's like this general kind of time when, white men didn't have to worry about their authority, and people of color and women knew their place. So his is a little more vague, right? It doesn't have the Roman Empire. But the mechanism is the same, that you tell people that if they only will believe in you and put their faith in you, you will bring them to a better place. And unfortunately, this has worked over 100 years in many different types of cultures to... It works to consolidate this kind of a bond with the leader. And
Putin also dreams of a Soviet Union again, and like a greater Russia beyond the borders, and that appeals to people as well. Because in your book, you do talk about strongmen 3 times. They sort of the state of mind of utopia, nostalgia, and crisis. And I was also taken by that. I'm like, wow, this is just Trump. This is Trumpism. So Trump did not invent Trumpism. Trumpism really is defined in a way by, well, there might be an updated version. It really is about what we're seeing Donald Trump from the playbook of these other strongmen. Is there any of the ones you've written about that you find Trump is the most akin to?
He's like a lot of them, and one of the scary things I discovered the people around him, especially in 2016-17, they have a lot of experience with with dictators of the past. Like Paul Manafort and Roger Stone worked for Mobutu in the Congo, like as a PR and lobbying firm, and they oversaw Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines, his fraudulent 1985 election. And then, of course, Manafort went on to work for Putin and others. So he has around him, and there's Steve Bannon, who worships Mussolini, and so he has around him a lot of people who have vast experience in fraudulent elections, in psychological warfare, and in this authoritarian playbook. He personally, as you know, he doesn't read, and I believe Ivana, his first wife, when she said he only had 2 books in his bedroom, Art of the Deal and Hitler's speeches, right? I'm sure he didn't even read Hitler's speeches. But it's not that he consciously copies them, although he does emulate these, Putin and Erdogan and these people. They're all opportunists, and they have an enormous sense of taking advantage of people and bullying and intimidating people. They know how to do that. Like Mussolini was a sexual assaulter. He beat people up. A lot of them come into office with criminal records or under investigation. They're crooks. And then they get power, and they, lo and behold, surprise, set up, they turn the public office of the president, the head of state, into a mechanism for private profit, and, they make deals with other despots. So they do this over and over again, and he's done the same thing. Yep.
It's remarkable in seeing how he is just cut from that same cloth, and it's all instinctual. I don't, like you said, I don't believe he reads that. He goes like, I think it would be good if I copied Mussolini here, or Putin here. He understands, maybe from watching news stories or History Channel or something, who knows. There was a new poll today. I have to get your reaction. Reuters poll. 52% of Republicans say Trump rightfully won this election. And only 29% say Biden rightfully won this election. And I understand some of the owning the libs thing and say things to maybe make a pollster to write something so that liberals get triggered and upset. But I don't think that's the case here. I don't know for sure, but I have a sense that they believe it because Donald Trump has alleged fraud before the election. And interestingly, Donald Trump advocated fraud. He told his supporters to vote once by mail and then vote again in person and see what happens.
Yeah.
So when you hear that 52% of Republicans say Trump rightfully won this election, how concerning is that to you as a historian and authoritarian expert?
Well, very, because propaganda works. It really does work. And then we have the very tragic other example of a lot of doctors and ER nurses now speaking out, saying there are people who are on the verge of intubation, and they're still saying that either they don't really have COVID or they're not that sick because Donald Trump told them, it was just like a flu, and also that Donald Trump, the magical body of the ruler, he got well so fast, so they think that it's not that serious. So the message from the poll and everything else going on is that propaganda works. Once people bond to these leaders, it's very hard to break the bond. And also, over and over, these guys know how to be what people need them to be. They're amoral, they're opportunistic, they'll be whatever you need them to be, which is why you have the most profane and corrupt people who partner with religious institutions. Like, who could have seen coming that Trump was going to be the darling of evangelicals and Orthodox Jews? Mussolini, who was the most atheist person alive, was the one who made the deal with the Catholic Church and created the Vatican City, an independent state. So these are patterns, and of course, as I wrote the book, I became more and more alarmed because Trump was checking. You read it. It's like, Trump was checking all the boxes, and although the reason I started writing the book is that I already had seen from the beginning with his rallies and his loyalty oaths, I hadn't realized how much he fit this pattern of these men. The outcome is different, right? Today we don't have one-party states. We don't have pure dictatorships, but the personality of the leaders are the same.
And it's interesting also earlier in the show, before you came on, I was reading from a nurse in South Dakota who talked about her patients saying things like, I don't have COVID, that screaming at her for the magic medicine, that Joe Biden's going to ruin the USA, and calling them names and saying, I don't have COVID, it can't be that. And again, that is part of the Donald Trump brainwashing. It's the same thing with the election. That was the point I made. It was about propaganda with Donald Trump, be it about COVID, be it about this election. It's cut from the same cloth. Is there any kind of antidote that you've seen historically that we can apply in the next 2 months as we try to get Trump out of office, and beyond that, to try to have people, I don't know if critical thinking skills is the right term, I'm not really sure what it is. I'll leave it at antidote. What do you suggest?
It's going to be hard in the next 2 months because he's still there. And right. Even where they either, like Hitler killed himself, Mussolini, was killed, or they go into exile, and then they're not there anymore, right? Then you can start having some kind of re-education, or just slowly people here get other models of leadership. But here it's a little bit different, because also one of the fundamental things of Trump culture is that Trump is a victim, his victim
yep.
cult, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're all whining. This is Erdogan and Berlusconi. They're all talking about witch hunts. They always have to be the victim, right? So that's going to be, if he ever does accept that he's gone and he leaves, to save face, he has to be the victim. So this actually endears people to him, and they feel very protective of him, because I talk about masculinity in the book, and there's like this paradox, because on the one hand they're alpha males, but on the other hand they're always whining, right? and they're not, and especially Trump. I mean, a lot of the other ones had a military background, so this is a little bit different. But Berlusconi's example, he was a business tycoon and a real billionaire. He wasn't a fake billionaire like Trump, but he was whining all the time too. But this endeared him to people, especially women. They feel protective of them. So that we have to think about that too. I'm just going on cases that I've studied that are in the book. What happens when these people leave? And that was the most interesting chapter to write, was endings. Like how do you get rid of them, and what happens after they go? And so it's very bizarre that we're now in this kind of twilight zone.
Right.
Literally, because it's supposed to be ending, but half the country thinks it's not ending.
It's alarming where 52% of Republicans think that Donald Trump's the rightful winner. Only 27% think it's Biden. It's better than 80% of Republicans thinking Donald Trump is the winner. I think that Donald Trump's going to try to get that number up higher, because then it puts pressure on Republican state legislatures to do the unthinkable, which is overturn the election. But if they're really concerned, they have a political ambitions their entire life, like some of these members of Congress, they might do what we would think unthinkable, and they'll justify it on Donald Trump's claims of fraud. And go, look, there's so much fraud here. Look at it. And Trump's had 50 lawsuits to prove the fraud. It doesn't matter he's lost them all. That doesn't matter. It's not about that fact. It's about the political game. So, look, I'm not concerned at all. These lawsuits will not overturn this election. The recounts won't overturn the election. That's not happening. It's more, can he put enough pressure on Republican state legislatures in states where Trump lost to Biden that would not certify the election or appoint a slate that is pro-Trump? And it's the latter one's less likely. The former one is more likely that they could say, well, there's so many questions, we won't certify it, and then they let it get to the House where they decide it by state party delegation. That means Trump wins. And I don't know if there'll be enough. I mean, you're going to need, the fact that Joe Biden got 306 electoral votes, they could take 2 or 3 states away and he still gets a 270. It would really take like 4 states. And that's what makes it a harder lift, to make it more of a long shot. If it was one state, I'll tell you, he would not be leaving. If it were just down to Pennsylvania, he would figure out a way to stay. That's why I'm thankful it was really a margin of more than one state.
Yeah, and well, what we can say is that he is an expert, because he's been doing it for decades, in shaking people down. He's an expert at bullying people, intimidating them, threatening them, and he, that's why many of these people partner with organized crime. They use the similar methods, and they know how to get people to do what they need them to do. So that's he's formidable in that regard. just like all of the people he admires. He doesn't believe in negotiating; he believes in threatening.
Do you think? And last question here, Ruth. Because he's all about negotiating and getting what he wants, do you think there's any chance that he's trying to position for some kind of pardon, even though that will not immunize him from any state liability, but perhaps even a global pardon that somehow the state, I'm not sure the state officials would go along with it, but Joe Biden and appealing to him for the good of the country and pardoning him so he has no issues with federal election laws or any kind of federal fraud cases?
I mean, it would be a disaster to pardon him, because one of the things that happens, and this we can keep Berlusconi as an example, because he never destroyed democracy, he just like really wounded it, and he normalized corruption. He was so corrupt, he had, when he got accused of bribery, he had a law passed that made bribery a lesser offense. You could imagine, and like dozens of laws like this. So pardoning would be an admission that it was somehow okay to have completely trampled on ethics in government and everything else. And then how does that work with his victim call? But the main thing he's concerned, one of the main reasons all of these guys need to stay in power is to avoid prosecution.
Right.
So the pardon would solve that. But it would be, in my judgment, it would be an enormous mistake. It would send the wrong message. It wouldn't make unity. It would make the same thing. Trump should have been opposed and kicked out in 2016 during the race, and not taken seriously after he said I could shoot someone. Instead, he was appeased. So this would be more appeasement. And he's already talking about running again, or having one of the mini Trumps run. And this would make him, this would not be for the unity of the country, this would make him think he can do anything he wants if he's pardoned.
I agree, and I hope that there's no contemplation of a pardon to unite the country. That's never going to happen. And I don't think, there's a point where Trump can become, his end game to stay in power starts getting to look slightly plausible, where then Biden goes, look, I got to get rid of the guy. And the only way to do it is a pardon, and I got to do it. And that would be a different conversation. If he's doing it to bring unity, that's never going to work, and that's absolutely not going to work. The very last thing here, in countries where you had strongmen and then they left, is it hopeful you can return to, I'm not sure if normal is the right term, because we were never perfect before. We could have been better before this, but is it more about the person? Like if the next Republican nominee for president, if it's not Donald Trump, if it's a Mitt Romney, then you go back to more traditional norms and people feel like things are normal? Or is it changed?
Yeah, if it were Mitt Romney, because he's one of the only people who didn't vote to acquit Trump in the Senate trial. Right. So he's a particular case. Sadly, he's now an exception because he preserves a minimum of the rule of law. But there's the GOP being an authoritarian-minded party now would produce people talk about Tom Cotton, who would be perfectly happy to turn troops on protesters and kill them, bring in the military. So although I'm not participating in the discussion that says let's not worry about Trump, he wasn't so bad, something worse could come later. Because we still have Trump, and he's acting in very bad ways, and we have to worry about this now. But we're not going to get rid of the problem of the GOP being a lawless party. You can put it that way.
It is, and at some point it's got to be called out that it's not really a democratic political party. I mean democratic with a D, about democracy, and that it truly is an authoritarian party, and its tendencies are to authoritarianism. It might be fascism, it might be whatever you want to define it, but it is alarming. Last thing, Ruth, this might be more of a psychologist question. I'm just intrigued because of Trump with the victimhood stuff. I've engaged with some Trump supporters who have been vile in their comments to me on like an email here or there, and then, or on Twitter. But I also found, like, even if they called the show and I mocked them and I was like mean to them, they didn't want to leave. They still wanted to talk. Like, and the same thing like in emails. Like, there's something, I would be like, I'm not talking to you anymore. I would just hang up. But is that something about the victimhood thing? Like, hey, I've always been treated badly, so it doesn't offend me to treat me badly now?
To some extent.
I know that's a psychological question, but it seems more psychological.
There's a core of people who can't be reached in any way, and they just want to spew hate, and they're not interested in dialogue. But I've also found people writing me, there are people who write me, if they're not threatening or, again, off the chart in the way I just described, if they just, a certain kind of hostility, sometimes I will write back to them in a civil way, and then we can have a dialogue, and they end up apologizing.
I've had that, too.
So,
I've had that. They're like, I can't believe you responded. I'm sorry. I was just angry. I get that.
Yes, and I think, there, where people talk about, we can't talk to any of these Trump people, that's maybe, it's a little more complex than that, because there are people, I'm not saying that just because they said, oh, I'm sorry, I wrote you, I was mad, they're going to become, they're going to start observing the rules of democracy and not go with Trump anymore. But there is room to speak to them, to some of them.
Interesting. We'll see.
And we have two choices. Either we give up on all of them, or we take it, if there are openings that they themselves create, we can reach out.
Well, Ruth, thanks for coming on. We had a long discussion here. I really enjoyed your book and chatting with you. Again, the book is Strongmen, From Mussolini to the Present. It's brand new. It's just out. It's a really good book. Yes, it's going to be alarming to you, but when you see the history, it's also helpful for the ends, what happened afterwards, and how people got rid of them. But it's really timely. And I'm glad that we're talking about it in the lame duck session of Trump, not when he was going in for 4 more years, because it would have been frightening, the book then. It really would have been much more frightening.
Sure.
So, all right, talk to you soon, Ruth. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. So, folks, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. You're my guest to the top of the hour, 866-997-4748. Some people have been waiting for a while. I promise come back and we'll get to you right after this break.